thank you very much for coming. I always think coming out in November in London is a bit grim in the evenings, but it's, of course, an event for which anybody would want to turn out. We're delighted to welcome you to what's a very major event for Cara, an opportunity to hear one of our most distinguished of the many distinguished Cara grantees there are now in this world. We're particularly glad to have him ushering in our 80th anniversary, because he also joined us in celebrating our 60th, I believe, and our 75th. And it's always brought us extremely good fortune, so I'm signing him up now for the 100th, 2033, and we can look forward, I hope, to hearing him then. My thanks to University College London for hosting us here on the day when we announced that the Provost of University College London, Malcolm Grant, will be our new president, taking over from Sir John Ashworth, Professor Sir John Ashworth, who's been our president for many years. I'm the chair of Cara, they're the presidents. And it's excellent to have someone with such clear and dynamic leadership. I have worked with Malcolm before in Oxford and I've been at Cambridge, and I'm delighted that he's joined us. And he's very, very sorry not to be here tonight because, of course, you work together in Southampton. I'm afraid he's travelling the world. We have to remember this is the international university, and it does mean that the provost travels. So he's not with us tonight. Cara was another of the great creations of Sir William Beveridge, Lord Beveridge, of the eponymous report, which is celebrating its 70th birthday from publication this week, I understand. And this is really another of his very far-sighted and also very humane pieces of work. The idea came to him in 1933 when he was staying with academic friends in Vienna, and they heard the news that Hitler had closed the German universities to Jews. And his new organization was meant, of course, just to be a temporary piece of crisis management, but it has had to go on to be a rather permanent piece of managing the crises of individuals and systemic crises in some cases, as we see now in Iraqi universities and in Zimbabwe. The need for funds, which he highlighted, is also something which is permanently with us. I can't really do better than to quote what he said in the Foundation statement in May 1933. We ask for means to prevent the waste of exceptional abilities, exceptionally trained. And since those first years, we've been able to help many eminent and many perhaps less eminent but extremely important and valuable people. Some had to leave everything behind and come to us in Britain, but increasingly it's hard to get to Britain if you are a refugee. And so Cara has begun to move out to where people are. And we've had a major program starting as a base in Jordan to help people in Iraq, both refugees from Iraq and academics actually still working with us on projects in Iraq. And that would be our base as and when things develop with Syria, which we're looking at the moment very seriously, and with other problems of the Arab Spring. And we owe a great deal particularly to the Sigrid Reising Trust, the Open Society Institute and the Nuffield Foundation, who've backed us in very adventurous explorations of the ways in which one can help people. It's really been very important to us. We've also been able to set up a virtual lecture theatre in the University of Zimbabwe in Harare, run through London. That's with the help, obviously, of South African colleagues, so that professors who are forced out of universities in Zimbabwe can still teach their students, particularly in medicine and in veterinary medicine, which have become almost stripped bare by the need to escape. So we are also, thank goodness, very strongly supported by the UK universities through our Cara University network. These are the universities who really founded us in the first place. We were their agency so that they could work with Beveridge to find places in their labs and departments for their German and Austrian colleagues. My generation learned a lot from those people directly, and later generations have profited from them. For example, this summer we saw the Paralympics, which was the brainchild of Dr. Ludwig Gutmann, who was one of our grantees. So now we're looking at our old skills of looking after families and people in this country, and also new skills with new methods and technologies to take us out around the world to try to deal with new challenges and also the old ones. Some seem to be always with us. The Horn of Africa produces refugees from every part of it. Iran has been providing us with refugees in desperate need as long as I've known Cara. Now, may I introduce our speaker tonight, our Cara anniversary speaker, Justice Albie Sachs, is a leading architect of the Constitution of Post-Apartheid South Africa. His legal career began at the Cape Bar, defending people charged under apartheid statutes and security laws. He was himself subjected to prolonged periods of detention and solitary confinement without trial, before going into exile, I believe, in 1966 in Britain, where Cara first met him. He studied law at Sachs and taught law in Southampton, before moving to Mozambique, where he was blown up in Maputo by a bomb placed in his car by South African security agents in 1988. He returned to Britain, and Cara had the privilege of helping him once more, and from 1990 he took part in the negotiations which led to South Africa becoming a constitutional democracy. In 1994, President Mandela appointed him to serve on the newly established Constitutional Court, from which he retired in 2009.
This is a thank you to Cara's speech. Where are you? Oh, there you are. And there are lots of things I like to boast about, but very high up on the list is I claim to be the only person who's been twice received by Cara. Not once, but twice. And the first time I came as a refugee to Britain, I was a psychological wreck. I'd been in solitary confinement for 2 quite long periods, tortured by sleep deprivation. Our people were being locked up, some murdered in prison, and eventually I left the country on exit permit. And it was a marvelous moment on the boat going out. In those days you traveled by boat, you didn't travel by plane. And and all the people down there, streamers are being thrown, and everybody's very joyous, it's festive and so on. And there I was also throwing streamers, and on the surface I was bright and happy, going off to England, but inside I was ravaged. I was emotionally destroyed, humiliated, weak, and a total discrepancy between that outer exhilaration and the inward feeling of just having been trampled upon. A marvelous thing about long boat journeys is it gives you a transition that you don't get when you get onto a plane and you land. Even if it's to New Zealand, it's still quite close. And I come to the UK, and I still remember so vividly those moments when I would go up to Hampstead Heath and just lie on the soft grass and see the kites flying. And I wasn't worrying about the police coming to pick me up. Was I attending a meeting unlawfully? Will they raid me tonight, tomorrow morning? Will I be locked up? So that sense of just the sheer freedom of being in a place and in a country where you're not watched and bedeviled and humbled in an awful way all the time because of your beliefs and who you are was quite marvelous. But of course the emotions of refugees are not simple like that. Part of you is joyous and relieved that you're out of danger, that the ground is not trembling underfoot, that you can watch kites flying and see dogs running and children playing. But part of you is in turmoil and a sense of rage, and you project your rage to quite a large extent on the country that's received you, because who else can you rage? You're no good raging against the people who kicked you out of your own country. They're too far away. And the rage was partly directed at Britain, the British Empire, that had gone out all over the world and trampled on people and destroyed indigenous cultures and civilizations and imposed itself. I remember reading afterwards in India when I visited for the first time, one of the Indian patriots in the independence movement there, quoting the statement that used to be proudly transmitted to people in schools in the UK, "The sun never sets on the British Empire. We are everywhere." And the Indian patriot wrote, "The sun never sets and the blood never dries on the British Empire." So here am I now, so thankful and so grateful and so relieved that your country, your land is receiving me and giving me shelter, and yet part of me is angry and projecting onto you my sense of displacement and the turmoil and the confusion, angry at the racism in Britain, at the anti-immigrant feeling that was so powerful then when British people went all over the world without entry permits, but with guns and missionaries and brandy and trinkets. And all those feelings are going through, and then I feel ashamed of my anger that here am I spitting mentally, emotionally on the very hand that is actually giving me a chance to study further. And by the way, Cara sometimes bends the rules a little bit, because I wasn't quite an academic when I came. But I was going to become an academic. So I was an academic in imagination. And of course I became an academic. And sometimes if the imagination is strong enough and powerful enough, and then I was just asked by a journalist from the Times Higher Education supplement, and what was the grant that Cara gave you? I don't remember a grant. Maybe I can still collect it. I think Cara found the people, the Joseph Rowntree, who helped me to do a PhD at Sachs. But that wasn't what Cara gave me. Cara gave me respect, a sense of dignity, a feeling that I mattered, a feeling that my ideas were valuable, a feeling that I was a human being with notions and passion and commitment, that had been forced to leave my country precisely because of my good qualities, not my bad qualities, which I have like many other people have. But that wasn't why I was locked up. I was locked up for being good, not for being bad. I was forced to leave the country not for being bad, but for being good. Sorry, did I get it wrong the first time? I was locked up not for being bad, but for being good. That I never had any doubt about. And here were people in Britain saying, "Oh, he must have done something. He's never smoked without fire, and maybe blah, blah, blah," and so on. It's simply saying that there is a lot of injustice in the world, of structured injustice. Instead of governments being there to protect people, governments become the persecutors of people, and we must show a different face. And it was also a different part of this varied British culture. There was so much racism, and sadly there still is a lot of racism in this country. But here were people who were anti-racist, British people, deeply, profoundly anti-racist, and they didn't find excuses for apartheid. They didn't feel sorry for the poor whites who were only 10% of the population. They just felt it was an unjust society. So there wasn't this kith and kin kind of identification. And that's what Cara gave me. Cara gave me that sense of sharing knowledge, sharing ideas, sharing passions, sharing idealism, sharing commitment. it was very easy to move into the anti-apartheid movement, to link up with faith communities, trade unions. The Liberal Party was very young. Liberals were very active then. Communist Party. Even I had my Tory friend who was very, very strongly anti-apartheid. And it was important that he could be my friend. He was a Tory and he was anti-apartheid, and that we could communicate with each other. So that's what I got. But there was something I said afterwards when I went to Mozambique after 11 years in the UK, that I was unhappy in England even when I was happy. I felt that sense of dislocation, a sense of distance, and a little bit of that rage, even although it became mitigated. And I had a very active and productive life here, and became father to 2 children, produced 2 books, broadcast a lot, taught a whole lot of students. I see somebody comes up to me, all portly, and says, you taught me at Southampton, do you remember? And I just remember when the name comes, some young guy or some young woman. So I got involved in British life. And of all my intellectual contributions in those 11 years in the UK, the one that I had the greatest commitment in terms of time and energy and research was sexism in the law. That was a theme that reached me in the UK with the same degree of intensity that apartheid reached me in South Africa. The whole question of gender and the complexities of gender, and the way I was implicated in the very themes. I wasn't like an outsider studying. I was a participant, observer, and privileged person in the whole dimension of it. And it happened to be the first book, I think, in the world on sexism in the law. And that was produced by the impact of the women's movement that was beginning to flourish then, and getting through to my heart, my mentality, my research capacity. And the big question for me then was, why were these upper class men on the bench so vicious towards women under the guise of being protective? And why was it not well known that the person's case, probably even in this lecture room now today, for 70 years, British judges said women were not persons, quite literally. One statute after another said any person who has a house worth £50 can vote. And women went to register as voters, and the judges said, you've got a house worth £50, but you're not a person. And somebody applied to be Bertha Cave, to be a barrister, and now the Law Society, there wasn't even a statute in the way, said, you've got your Oxford degree, you're clever, you passed all the exams, you've done everything necessary, but you're not a person. And so it went on for 60 years. And this kind of fascinated me. We all knew as lawyers about the extent to which judges had favoured employers against workers. That was quite well known as forms of bias. But what about the bias based on patriarchy? Wasn't well known, and to this day it's still not well known, in spite of that book that was authored and commented on the time. I see one copy is being held up at the back there. And I mention this with some detail to indicate that we come here not simply to sell our wares. We come here to participate in the life of the nation, to share in the intellectual activity, to be influenced, to influence, and it's very, very, very rich experience. So that was the first time I came to England as a refugee, psychological wreck. The second time I came as a physical wreck, half an arm shorter than when I'd come the first time, travelling first class for the first time in my life on British Airways, but unconscious, so I couldn't even enjoy it. And ending up at the London hospital, which amusingly didn't want its name known in case there was another attempt to get at me in the London hospital. that didn't want its name known, the London Hospital. And I had a pseudonym, and I was actually sent somebody from Scotland Yard to protect me. And this was a weird experience for me. I was used to running away from the police, especially the secret police. And he also saw the humor of it. We had marvelous exchanges, and he wrote to me out of the blue about 2 years ago about some project that he's involved in. And now this is a different experience. It's my body, including my mind and my brain, plonked here in the UK. And something happened that turned out to be very, very special. Often when these things are happening, you're not aware at the time. I still remember E.P. Thompson, the fabulous social historian, speaking to a crowded room. It was so terrific to see the intellectual excitement. And I'm not going to try and pretend his accent, but he speaks about some displaced farmer in Cornwall trudging along with his stick and bit of clothing over his shoulder to London, and he doesn't say, I'm going to join the Industrial Revolution. You're not aware at the time that you're participating in the Industrial Revolution. So at the time I didn't realize that what's happening to me lying on the hospital bed was I was developing an affection and a love and a tender connection with the United Kingdom that I'd never had, in spite of all the accomplishments, the achievements, the things I was enabled to do the first time. And it was the nurses. They would peel off my bandages, they would wash my wounds, clean my body, and it was a kind of organized physical attention and love that reached into me, that reached my soul, that made it uncomplicated, no buried rage, no ultra ambiguity. This was simply my body on behalf of me, Albie, receiving the kindness, the attention, the care. I was so thrilled when I was watching the Olympic Games and saw the National Health Service featured as one of the glories of the United Kingdom. For me, it was one of the glories, and not simply because I had access to medicine, but because of that organized caring. And maybe money plays a bigger role than it used to, but it's not based on money. It's based on a sense of vocation. It's based on a sense of the importance of healing. And I got that. And I got that in the most wonderful way, without speeches, without pronouncements, without anybody saying how wonderful they were. And I'm glad that the second journey as a refugee, physical wreck, which I might say was far less damaging to me than being a mental wreck, far easier to overcome than overcoming the traumas of the sleep deprivation and the imprisonment and so on, provided a kind of healing of my own psyche, and also emphasized the importance of the relationship between the hosts, the refugees, the different countries. And I think back, I don't know if Cara gave me any money the second time. Maybe I've got two claims. It wasn't a grant in that sense. It wasn't a welfare body. There is a need for welfare bodies, just to look out for others. There's a duty under international law to receive refugees. It's on all states. When your home state that should be providing you protection persecutes you, then organized humanity establishes the norms in the Geneva Conventions to receive refugees. And there's a saying in African languages that your foot never knows where your nose is going to take you. There, but for the grace of God, if you're a believer, goes I. It's a universal thing, you don't know. It's partly that. It might befall you. But long before you even get there, It's not simply responding to humanitarian need to cope with injustices elsewhere in the world. It is that. Of course it's that. It starts with that. But we refugees, we are people with brains and life experience. We participants in a particular culture. We bring it with us and we share it. And when one thinks of the extent to which what I might call the Anglo culture, whether in the United Kingdom or the United States, benefited in Canada from the refugees from the 30s, the brilliant legal minds, whether it's scientists or political philosophers, or Karl Freund was the great labor theorizer, influencing, opening up a whole new theme of law in this country. A huge enrichment of pollination, cross-pollination, that's so powerful. And people like Max Weber and the writers coming across, Thomas Mann and the others. So it's well beyond welfare. It's a sharing of humanity, a sharing of ideals, of cultures, of transmission, interaction. Bertolt Brecht, one can go on. Many, many more people, and it could be Kurt Weill and in music and the great photographers and the filmmakers. And so it's a huge benefit. It's not putting up tents to receive poor, bedraggled people whom you're giving soup kitchen type attention to. Not that I'm against doing that when it's necessary, but it's a form of internationalism, if you like, at its highest, of respecting the intellect, respecting ideas, culture, the visual eye, the painter, the people who've got something to contribute. So that's a second major feature of the kind of work that's particularly relevant to the refugees that Cara deals with. That's not to say only academics need apply when it comes to refugee status, but it's to say of all the refugees who have a claim for very pertinent attention because they have so much to offer. And it's more than just so much to offer. It's keeping a flame of intellect alive, the flames that are being doused elsewhere. It gives courage to people in different countries to feel they must carry on and carry on and carry on for as long as they can. And they're not going to be annihilated. And the ideas are not going to be destroyed. It's part and parcel of that internationalism of ideas and values and faith and belief that's very important in itself. Sigmund Freud, I'll interrupt every now and then and throw in an extra name here and an extra name there. So that's the other benefit. It's the extent to which the home country benefits, is enriched, as well as doing its duty in terms of any moral code it might have. But there's a third benefit that to my mind is enormous. When we go back to our countries, which many of us do, we take what we like to feel is often the best of Britain with us. Ideas that we picked up, values, and it can be the obvious things, it can be information. When I taught at Southampton, and by the way, I'd got my PhD, I was trying to get out of law. I've tried 3 times, and now I've given up trying to get out of law. I thought I'll do a PhD, it'll give me a chance to do something else in my life. But in the end, I became a law teacher. I loved it. And I was taken on because Southampton University needed someone to teach international law. Now, I'd never studied international law, I'd never practiced international law, but I was a foreigner. So on that profound academic basis, I was taken on, and I studied in advance of the students, but I didn't want to just stop at that. I taught criminal law, criminology. I taught the law of contract, the law of tort, family law. I knew I'd be going home to South Africa one day, and I wanted to take with me the best, the most advanced thinking, the ideas, because these would be useful in developing our new legal practices in South Africa, and they were. Ideas on family law, they were under the impact of the women's movement and some judges who were responsive, very progressive in the 70s and 80s. People will remember those who were active then. And I could feed that in all sorts of ways into our new non-racial, non-sexist South African constitutional vision. But you take back more than that. You take a kind of culture of dialogue, of listening, of respect for others. Sometimes people can be infuriated by everything on the one hand, on the other hand, and nothing is real. Everything is just a debate, an argument, depends upon your point of view. Well, how do you define freedom? The minute somebody's saying, well, it all depends on how you define freedom, you've lost the argument. Or how do you define torture? There are just some things that are not dependent on definition. They're experiential. They relate to deep values. In any event, at the same time, the importance for deliberation and consideration and reflecting, and even the use of language, the lovely use of language, the skills of writing and presentation. I like to feel these things fed into me. I could bring them back to South Africa. And I would watch a lot of our people on television. For the ANC, I loved the ANC, almost literally willing to give my life for the ANC. And I'd see our spokespeople with wooden answers, party line. Now, if they'd spent more time in England and watched the debates, you're never going to get away with that. You've got to look human, you've got to chat, you've got to talk, you've got to smile, you've got to take a joke. And these are not just gimmicks. They're part and parcel of humanizing dialogue and making discussion more interactive and less formulaic. So it's these unconscious things that seep in that may be more important even than the formal learning which you can pick up from books. And we take it back. I like to feel the best of Britain, or United States, or Canada, or France, or wherever it might be, in India, or China, or West Germany, or East Germany, or Norway, or Sweden, all the countries we were in exile in. We bring all these things back, we feed them in. And so for me, the project then gets well beyond the grant that is given. As I say, I don't even remember. You see, I'm so ungrateful that I don't even remember if you forked out any cash. You certainly facilitated my ability to recover. But the big thing was the respect. And respect not based on any accomplishment or achievement or position, but based on the fact that I was an academic in being or in creation, or an academic in fact. The respect for knowledge, the respect for ideas, the respect for the right of people to have views and values, and not to be beaten down and trampled upon because they believe in science, they believe in knowledge, they believe in democracy, they believe in human dignity. These are the things that Cara gave me. And that's why I have such an affection. Affection is much stronger than gratitude. Gratitude, I don't think I have much, when I'm sitting here thinking about it, I think I have much gratitude. You live your life, you respond, you connect with people. Gratitude is a kind of, thank you, sir, thank you, madam. There's something subordinating about gratitude, something that inferiorizes you because you are saying thank you. If you say thank you for being a generous, giving, lively, bright, sparky person, not for the money or the gift or the wherewithal, but thank you for believing in us. Thank you for showing a human side and humanity in your own particular way. That's a kind of gratitude that I can live. And that's the sort of warmth that I feel towards Cara. This is not a fundraiser this evening, so I'm not doing it to get you to come out with your paper money or anything like that. It's really coming from the heart. So I would say then the combination of Cara and the nurses at the London hospital have fixed me for life. And I was absolutely thrilled that I was asked to be the first speaker. So just as I treated a little bit in being an academic before I was an academic, I'm treating a little bit in congratulating Cara on its 80th birthday before its 80th birthday, and I'll leave it at that.
Something about your books. When are you
Sure.
moving on?
If people have questions, if they have time.
Questions? That's wonderful. You have, I know you've got another appointment, and we'll keep an eye on the time. 7:30.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Please. I should say that there are copies of 2 of your books here, and that they can be signed afterwards. And the 2 are, Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter and Strange Alchemy. Please do.
Okay, so the Soft Vengeance of Freedom, I'm doing a little promo now. Soft Vengeance of Freedom Fighter has just been reissued by Souvenir Press, and that deals with being blown up and some of the themes that I've mentioned now, and certainly the experience the London hospital is there, and a certain Dr. Schuller-Marx coming to me at a certain moment and saying, what would you like to do? And mentioning that I'd like to work on a new constitution. And it's a very personal story. And then The Strange Alchemy of Life and Law carries the story forward in the sense of it's the alchemy of life experiences. To what extent do they enter into your work as a judge? It's supposed to be detached, objective, scientific, and life experience is subjective. And some judges and legal theorists say there's no connection between the two. You suppress everything you've experienced and you become a totally detached person, simply an instrument of rationality. And my experience was just the opposite, but you don't allow your pure subjective personal emotions to dictate the legal outcomes, but a lot of them feed into, but they are refracted by the law, by your colleagues, by the prism of the constitutionality. And I deal with a whole lot of cases in which these two sort of interact. So then the one is totally personal, written in the present tense, the experience of being blown up, losing an arm, waking up after a long operation to see, oh, I haven't got an arm anymore, and what it's like recovering, and why soft vengeance. And it's the idea of, I got a note when I was in the London hospital that didn't want its name known, don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. And I thought, oh, what we get is from Bobby, Comrade Bobby. We're going to cut off the arms, blind in one eye. Is that the kind of country that I want? Is that what we're fighting for? And I said to myself, lying in the hospital bed, if we get democracy, if we get freedom, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. And then later on I heard that one of the persons who planted the bomb had been captured in Mozambique. And I said, if he's put on trial, and the evidence is not enough to show that he's guilty, and he's acquitted, I said, that will be my soft vengeance. Because to live under the rule of law is much more important than for some rascal to be sent to jail. And then I knew that would be the title of the book, The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter. And in a sense, it presaged, is that the right word? Right pronunciation?
Yes.
Presaged the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's a new way of looking at justice, and my experience has been soft vengeance is much more powerful than hard vengeance. Hard vengeance means, okay, you're stronger than the other side. You've won because you're more powerful. Soft vengeance is the triumph of the ideals, of the values, of the things that led you to suffer in the first place, whatever traumas you might have suffered. And it's far more powerful because it's enduring, and it's helping to lift the country, the society, and even the people participating to a different level. And so now I've become an evangelist for soft vengeance, and that's in the book.
Can I just make a contribution and comment rather than a question? I know there are so many, many strands to your inspiring life, but I would like to thank you for the contribution that you made in the 70s to developing and enabling the feminist critique of law. It was at a time when the criticism of the law was very much pioneered by women alone, and women were very much criticised for that. So you brought a kind of gender-neutral perspective. It was a man speaking, but it was terribly important. It was very inspirational. And I thank you for this contribution. It is actually the original first edition, October 1978, probably the only hardback copy that I could afford when I was a student at the University of Manchester. And I've always been grateful to you for showing us and leading the way, and I thank you very much.
Well, thank you. In fact, I remember meeting a young advocate then, a barrister, named Helena Kennedy, whom I drew on quite heavily then. And it was very thrilling for me, because it was being part of a movement that was breaking through. And as you said, it wasn't just a critique of the way male judges and the bar and so on had treated women. It was a critique of law. And the inside, outside, there's so many dimensions that have enriched law that are almost taken for granted now, that were pioneered by the women's movement, because it went well beyond simply saying women have a right to be lawyers, women have a right to be judges. It was saying we have to reconceive law in terms of relationships and not just in terms of power. So for me, it was a marvelous couple of years. So thank you for thanking me. Now you can thank me again. And the copies are very hard to come by the way. It's one of the best investments you've made.
Thinking ahead for the next 20 years towards the Cara centenary, do you have any particular hopes for Cara, any particular thoughts about how Cara should be focusing on what we should be doing over these next 20 years?
I mean, my hope, of course, but it's a totally vain hope, is that Cara will become redundant, that we live in a world without refugees. No, I don't think Cara predicted specifically who the next wave of refugees would be. To some extent, when I was involved, a lot of its work was modeled on the refugees who came from Central Europe, often very, very highly educated. I mean, people with 4 or 5 doctorates, from Berlin and Sorbonne and elsewhere. And now maybe some of the refugees were coming without that super learning, and it required an adaptation. So I would just say to be light on your feet, to be adaptable, and to keep that humane dimension must be at the core. It's that respect for knowledge and the importance of knowledge, and the importance of receiving people with respect. You're not. The basis was not doing someone a favor or being kind or being charitable. Of course, those things came into it, but they came in as consequences, not as motivation. And I think, provided you maintain that kind of fidelity to the ethos, if you like, then I think you will find the naturally good responses. And I really hope, of course, that nobody from this island, this country, has to be a refugee elsewhere, to be received elsewhere. I mean, when I was a child, it could have happened. We had lots of refugees from Britain when I was a child who were fleeing the potential of the Nazi invasion. That's all I can offer.
you think the question is off subject, please rule it out. But as one of the leading drafts of the new constitution, how do you think it's working out? I dare ask, bring it back into something matter of your address.
The South African
Will
constitution.
there ever again be a Cara, a refugee from South Africa looking to help Cara?
I'm extremely proud of our constitution, and in a sense even more proud now than I was when we formulated it. I was proud that we found a text that our country could live by. The Constitution brought us peace. It gave us a country. It was more than just a document to regulate government and establish certain basic values. It was a peace treaty. And it was more than that. It was a vision. And it was more than that. It was a cautionary tale against repetition of the things that our people could do, even us, that nobody is anointed by history to be good. And there are new temptations, new pressures, new generations coming in. And why I feel even more proud now is that the Constitution has stood up remarkably well. We have free and fair elections in South Africa. Many people are angry that the voters keep voting for the ANC. Well, as Bertolt Brecht said, change the people. You know, if they're so dumb, change the people. We have very vigorous debates inside the ANC, outside the ANC, in our country. Observers come to look at our elections, not to see if they're free and fair, but to learn lessons they can take to other countries. We take that for granted. But that's all part of what we established. Independent electoral authorities, good people being appointed according to certain processes. We've established that. Our president steps down after 2 terms. There's no Mugabe, Mubarak, Gaddafi in South Africa. We take that for granted. That's all because we established certain key precepts, values, formulations. The Constitutional Court, on which I served for 15 years. We did remarkable work in all sorts of areas. Social and economic rights. It's now coming on the agenda. The UK might be the last. The first shall be the last shall be the first. So we were the last, we became the first. Maybe you were the first, maybe you'll be the last. To see the right not to go hungry or to go without shelter or to be excluded from healthcare and so on is as fundamental as the right to speak your mind and to vote. Now it's sweeping Latin America, it's catching on in different parts of the world. We're not even the first anymore in social and economic rights. We declared capital punishment to be antithetical to the values of our Bill of Rights. We were the 5th country in the world to accept that to deny same-sex couples the right to marry was a gross violation of their fundamental dignity as human beings. South Africa, the 5th in the world after Canada and Belgium and Spain, I think. Amazing, but there we were because of our Constitution and the text of the Constitution. And there's so many features that still apply. Our court has struck down the anti-corruption police squad was disbanded, Scorpions they were called, replaced by another body called the Hawks. And people went to court to say the new body is not effective enough, and by 5-4 the judges said it wasn't effective enough because there was too much control over appointments of cabinet ministers and others, the very people who might have to be investigated. And I might say that when our courts give a judgment that government is not happy with, there's far less rudeness from government than the judges in the United Kingdom when they give a ruling saying that we can't deport people to countries where they might be tortured. There's an absolute outcry and no respect for separation of powers at all. There might be, they won't defy the court order, but far ruder words are said here than are said in South Africa. There are lots of pressures, there are lots of problems, there are lots of things that we certainly can't blame on apartheid in the past. I sometimes say we shoot ourselves in the foot so often we've run out of feet to shoot ourselves in. So the Constitution doesn't solve the problems of the country, and it doesn't prevent you from creating new problems. And I mean the shooting of the mine workers was catastrophic. It was totally unacceptable. I'm not speaking for quoting now, please. It's not for a judge to go around talking about things that are before a commission of inquiry in South Africa and so on. So I'm trusting you not to report these off-the-cuff remarks. And a massacre is a massacre, whoever the government is, whoever's pulling the triggers. So there are lots of totally unacceptable things. But having the Constitution there provides a framework for people to protest, to speak out freely, to contest for political elections and so on. It's in that sense a wonderful country to be in. People are talking all the time, they're arguing, they're debating, sometimes in a very shallow way, sometimes in a very, very rich way. What I find very remarkable when I was interviewed for The Observer recently on 5 cultural episodes, books you've read, plays you've seen, ballets you've attended. Well, I'm living in Nairobi, and that weekend I went up to Ethiopia, and I wasn't seeing the classic kind of things that you do in London. But I was able to mention amongst the cultural features for me was switching on the TV, seeing workers on strike in South Africa singing, and singing beautifully, with beautiful moves. There's a kind of an artistry and a form of expression where culture is part and parcel of the most intense aspects of your life. It's not something you pay money for to enjoy and you go to drama school to learn about. It's something you live. And that's still very, very strong in South Africa. I think of it's almost the only industrialized country in the world where that popular culture has survived and got a new kind of an energy, so that public expression is involved in, going on strike is a very modern kind of a thing. Organized strike in terms of protected strikes, unprotected strikes, you can't be much more modern than that. And yet people still sing and they move and so on. So in that sense, South Africa is a marvelous country. And the Constitution, to my mind, is the bedrock. And we have a strong judiciary that speaks out, a very lively press and lively contestation. So in that sense, I'm hopeful for South Africa. And the very things that we take for granted, it's good and it's bad. It's good you take it for granted because it's part of your society and your culture. President stepping down, free and fair elections, free speech and so on, independent judiciary. It's bad in the sense that you don't prize it and value it with the intensity that it deserves. The good doesn't wipe out the bad, but the bad doesn't destroy the good. And for me, the Constitution is an unmitigated good in our country. And working in Kenya now, it gives me such joy to see the new Chief Justice in Kenya looking to South Africa, looking at the decisions that our court gave, the beginnings of an African jurisprudence based on human rights and fair processes and transparency, and all these phrases we throw around that we've had to struggle for. So I see lots of positives. I might say if Albie only sees negative, then the world's finished. The world's finished. But I genuinely see lots of positives. Okay, maybe one more?
I guess to maybe push you a little further on the potential to see some negatives in something that you looked at maybe when you were a little bit younger. You were coming into law school and going through law school and publishing at a time when positivist law was maybe first being questioned. And you seem to have a real passion still for black letter law and for representative democracy, maybe more so sort of centered around a judiciary in South Africa than it would be here. I'm wondering, when you were creating those sort of constitutional structures in the judiciary, were there elements that you found when you encountered the system here in the UK that you wished would change, and that you put into action to change? And I'm thinking specifically maybe of more kind of the Kantian approach to law that we see coming out of South Africa and England.
Positivism became an absolute swear word in South Africa at the time we were making a constitution. And there was a very specific reason for that. And that was lots of judges were saying, that's the law. My job is to obey the law. It's the system. I'm working in the system. It's better I'm there than somebody else. And people like John Dugard was criticizing it from a more natural law kind of approach. There's certain deep core fundamental values, and to simply say that's the letter of the law, and to drive people out of their homes, and to punish people for loving somebody of a different race, to seize somebody's land, to execute people, to whip people, to transform the whole nature of the judicial process, that's the law. It made you mechanical agents of oppression and injustice. So that's why we denounced positivism. At the same time, my colleague Kate Regan has stressed very much the importance of text, of language. And maybe when you're living in a constitutional democracy and you fought so hard for a text, but our text is a text that's not just words, it's values, it's history, it's part of the text. When I had one lovely lunch at the US Supreme Court one day, and there were 6 of the judges there, and I might say it was a lousy lunch and a marvelous conversation. And Justice Alito asked me, would I say the Constitutional Court of South Africa was an activist court? Now the word activist is thrown out like, ooh, the worst, most horrible, terrible thing. And I said, yes, but we have an activist constitution, which was a very smart answer, and I got credit for a clever answer. But the text is activist. The text starts off with the assumption that our country is unjust, not that it's just, and any government change of the status quo has to be looked at askance. It's the failure of government to correct the injustices that has to be looked at askance. So values of human dignity, taking account of historical context, taking account of the massive inequalities, disparities in our country, led us to say very early on that ours is a constitution for transformation. And the theme of transformative justice is central to everything that we were doing. So that's the total opposite of your mechanical black letter law positivistic approach. At the same time, it doesn't mean you disregard text. In that sense, we all have to sing from the same hymn sheet or the same international, whatever sheet you like to sing from. All the judges have to agree on, as Kate put it, it limits the range for reasonable dispute and difference. Otherwise, you're simply inventing and creating in a way that's not disciplined by a text and by a kind of new legal tradition that you're building on. I'm surprised you say that I was a supporter of positivism and, oh, you don't, okay. Because the whole of Strange Alchemy is a challenge to what I regard as the separation of heart and mind. And I was very thrilled to pick up a lecture given by William Brennan, US Supreme Court judge, on reason and passion in law. And he said, if it's just reason, you can come up with the most terrible results. The judges who declared that it was unconstitutional to have minimum hours of work, and that was even before the Roosevelt era in the United States, because that violated liberty and freedom of contract, they had rationality on their side, they had precedent on their side. They left out of account the conditions under which people were working and why it was important for workers to get together and not enter into individual contracts, and why it was important for the legislature to lay down certain basic conditions of work. He said you couldn't justify the transformation in legal thinking simply on the basis of reason. You had to look to the meaning of the law to people in their lives. And he said he used the word passion as the contrast, not to indicate some wild, abandoned, crazy emotion that judges have. Passion meant compassion. Passion meant heart. Passion meant a respect for human dignity, for people, for people's lives, what the law means. Now he's saying this in the United States in the 70s and 80s. And I'm living that in South Africa 20 years later. And I find it something universal, and you'll find judges all over the world dividing. Some maybe put all passion and very little reason, and it goes all over the place. And it's not sustainable. Some it's all cold, mechanical reason, which always benefits those in power. It always ends up benefiting the status quo. And some of us, we have the conceit that we try and direct compassion in a disciplined, rigorous way through text, through reason, but at the same time we inform reason with passion, with emotion, with sensibility. And then I quote in the book a number of cases where this has become real. And I'll just end with this. What gave me the clue to bind the book together was writing the judgment in the same-sex marriages case. And I realized as I was discussing the case and coming to the conclusion that in 1991, I'm just back in South Africa, and I'm driving from my home to the center of town, and I'm sweating. And I'm sweating because I'm driving with my left, and I haven't been doing that very much. I'm sweating because it's hot, November. Are we still November? Southern Hemisphere, opposite of here now. It's hot, but I'm sweating because I'm going to a gay pride march. And I'm embarrassed. And I'm awkward. And I wish I could have a poster saying straights for gays. And then I'm ashamed that I even have that wish. And eventually I get there and I'm late and I don't even know where to drive. The streets have all changed. And I join in the march and I go next to Edwin Cameron, who's now on the Constitutional Court. And I feel fantastic. And I feel proud. And I feel I've crossed over. Something's happened to me. That's 91. In 95, I'm on the court now, and Pius Lange, Chief Justice, says Christian Lawyers for Africa are having a conference near Johannesburg during our court vacation. He's going to be away. They want the Constitutional Court to send somebody there. Anybody can go. So I say, well, Pius, I'm on duty then. I don't think I'm the right person. He says, you're just the right person. I'm not a Christian. I'm a lawyer. I'm from Africa. But he wanted me to go to represent the court. If he went, it would look like a sectarian identification. If I go, I'm representing the court. So now I'm being driven there. I'm not sweating. It's in the evening. But I'm feeling uncomfortable. What do I say to them? I can't just say, have a good conference, wish you well on behalf of the court. These are people of conscience. And I want to give them something of the dimension of the work that we're doing and the meaning of the court. So I decided to tell them about the problem I had when swearing the oath, when we sworn in. And one by one, the members of the court take the oath. Mandela's there. It's an amazing day. And some, you can say either, so help me God, or you can say, I affirm. And most said, so help me God, in 5 languages of South Africa. And I was Sachs. I was the last, alphabetically challenged. What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And I grew up in a very secular home. Very secular. My parents fought their parents over religion. And it was very tough on me as a child not to pretend a belief I didn't have. And I felt it would be dishonorable to me and dishonorable to God, if God exists, if I'm pretending a belief I don't have, which was quite tough for a young child. But it just meant to me conscience is everything. And I felt I had to speak to them as people of conscience. That's what we have in common. And I told them, but I wanted to raise my right arm because this was my oath, my most solemn oath, the oath of sacrifice, the oath of commitment. My oath to the Constitution was embodied in my arm. And if I wanted to raise my right arm, then I had to say, so help me God. And so I raised my right arm and I said, so help me God. And I thought they'd be cross with me for instrumentalizing. They stood up and they cheered. And then the next day, I took them on a tour of the court and the building which we built in the heart of the old Fort Prison. We say with a very dubious pride, we South Africans have the only prison in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. No one else can make that claim. And that's where we built our court. And it's filled with beautiful art, and it's just a terrific place to be in. And about 70 of them come on the tour, and they seem to enjoy it very much. And I want to rush off to the women's jail, where the Commission for Gender Equality has its headquarters now. I've got to speak there. And they say, no, you can't go. We have to say a prayer. And some prayers are quite short, and some prayers go around the world a few times with a lot of philosophy. This was the second one. And it's getting later and later, and I say, well, thank you. And my secular self received their prayer because they were giving their prayer with that's what they had to give. And I was happy to receive that gift. Without sharing the philosophical basis of it, I could share the manner in which it was given. And I'm about to rush off, and they say we must lay on hands. The 70 pair of hands, believing hands on my secular body, and it takes quite a long time. But again, I received it. I received it because they were giving it with commitment and feeling from the inner self, and my inner self received it. So now I'm writing the same-sex marriages judgment. How can I write a judgment that acknowledges the people claiming their fundamental rights as human beings, as people, to love, to be affectionate, to accept commitments in the way that these are high ideals of humanity. Fundamental rights, crucial to one's personality and dignity, the right to equality. At the same time, right so that the Christian Lawyers for Africa can understand and feel they're not simply being discarded and rejected as bigots and backwards and through a label, but to bring home to them that their right to have their beliefs protected is covered by that same umbrella that protects the rights of same-sex people to celebrate their marriages in public, and find a way of connecting the sacred and the secular. And possibly the strongest statement made by any judge in recent years about the importance of religion as part of public life came from secular me. And maybe I can do it more freely than a religious judge because I'm not trying to proselytize, promote my own faith. I'm a secular person acknowledging how significant religion is to millions and millions of people, the majority of people in the world, certainly in South Africa. And when ultimately the South African Council of Churches called the judgment a Solomonian judgment, I was particularly pleased, partly because my dad was Soli, so that was a trip off the old block, but because unconsciously I was trying to write, you don't write two judgments. They're not separate ways of interpreting the Constitution to please one group and to please another group. You've got to find a common language, a common value, and it's very disciplining to acknowledge diversity in society and find principles that are broad enough, expansive enough, rich enough, and sustainable enough to reach out to everybody. In any event, once I worked that through, that made me think about the strange alchemy of life and law, and the book then took its shape from that.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I won't spend longer. We have all been deeply impressed, as we knew we would be. We are very grateful to you for coming. We know you have other things to do in a very busy day. May we thank you very much indeed.